Hopefully, as you can see on the screen, our topic for this afternoon, we're going to be discussing religion and health. The aim of this topic is to look at religion and health and see if there's any benefits to religion on the whole and whether it would benefit your health. I appear to have frozen on my screen. I hope I'm still coming through okay. I see Andy. Am I still moving, Andy? Yep. Okay. So as long as we don't crash all of a sudden, that's fine. What health is and any benefits that we can find from religion. Obviously, as Christadelphians, we're going to be focusing mostly on the Bible. So, first of all, it'd be worth coming up with a definition for health. What is health? The World Health Organization, which we're all pretty familiar with now over the last couple of years, defines health as the state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease. This definition is important because it covers areas not usually directly linked with health, like social factors. However, the problem with the definition is that word complete. The majority of people, therefore, would be considered unhealthy, as that there would be a lapse one of those three categories, either physical, mental, or social at some point in their life. And because it's complete, you need to have all three as to top level, otherwise you couldn't be considered healthy. The verse that we have on the screen from Psalms says that we were made by God. It says, for you formed my inward parts, you knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. If we were made by God, he should know everything about us, so that the advice that we get in the Bible should be beneficial to us, or at least not detrimental. So that's something that we'd like to look at. For the majority of the things that we'll look at in the Bible this evening, there's going to be two aspects to it, both a spiritual application of the passage that we'll read and a potentially more literal application that might help us with our health. So we'll start with the Bible and medicine. Like I said, the Bible isn't a science book, but it was ahead of its time with quite a lot of its instructions. Mostly found in the law and mainly in Leviticus, where we had our reading from this afternoon. Now, with hand washing, it's been a large part of many religions for thousands of years, with the example that we have here being from the Bible, and it embedded itself in the cultural habits of the people and the Jewish people. So you've got the idea of that first verse talking about after you excrete, to make sure it's away from the camp so it doesn't get taken back into the water supply, which was often the case previously. And then Leviticus 15 talks about washing hands specifically, and to wash themselves if anything is touched that's unclean, and that person will be unclean until evening to prevent that spread of disease. But comparing it to us, it was only 2 centuries ago in the 1800s, in the mid-1800s, that the washing of hands was, or rather the not washing of hands was linked to the spread of disease. And the first national hand hygiene guidelines were published in the 1980s. So only about 40 years ago. So with that, the Bible was really ahead of its time. If you look at how the Jews were treated during the plague, they were persecuted because they didn't seem to be getting the plague as much as other groups, and that is thought to be down to this cultural habit of washing hands. Yeah. So there are other sanitary practices in the Bible. We've got the idea of circumcision, and like I said, there's a spiritual and a practical application to a lot of passages. We've recently discovered that cancer of the penis only occurs or almost always occurs in uncircumcised men. We know that circumcision is that practice of cutting off the flesh, and it's that spiritual sign of a covenant with God. But it's interesting that it also has a a practical application. That passage that we have underneath that, the one from Leviticus 14, verses 33 to 57 that we had read out, describes the procedure of a house with leprosy. You have, for example, the mold in the house and it gets scraped off. And then if it comes back, you scrape it off again. And if it comes back that third time, you have to take down the house brick from brick to prevent the mold from continually coming back. Now, today we know that mold and mildew can cause a number of respiratory problems and other issues with people if they're breathed over a long period of time. However, this isn't knowledge that would have been accessible back then, that they didn't have microscopes to study microbes or any other problems. With this law here, it would have prevented problems like this. Even recent studies are still looking into this. So a study in 2007 also connects mold in a house with depression. Now, to us, this might seem obvious because you think it's more correlation than causation. If you're not happy, you're not going to look after your house, you're more likely to get mold in the house. Or if you're in an economic position where you can't afford to maintain the house, you might be more prone to things like depression. However, there's been a study in 2017 that showed it's the mold toxicity that causes these changes and depression to become evident. So depression, anxiety, and things like brain fog and insomnia if you're living in a house with mold or mildew. So again, the Bible is ahead of its time with practices that are found here. We've got this passage from Galatians on the screen. It says, "Now the works of the flesh are evidenced: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. I warn you, as I warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God." So the passage, most of these have that potential for negative health benefits, but I've singled out sorcery here. You see it's slightly bolder. The word sorcery in Greek is the word pharmacia, which should hopefully remind you of pharmacy. So it's taken to be referring to drugs that we know now can have negative health impacts. Now, quarantine, we are probably all now relatively experts in quarantine and isolation to prevent the spread of disease. The idea of quarantine is to prevent the spread of highly infectious diseases. It's a technique that's still used today. So the fact that we read about it here in Leviticus 14 shows that the Bible that is ahead of its time. It suggests that whoever wrote this book had some pretty sound knowledge or was inspired. So if I just read the passage, it says, "And he who is to be cleansed shall wash his clothes and shave off all his hair and bathe himself in water, and he shall be clean. And after that he may come to the camp, but live outside his tent 7 days. And on the seventh day he shall shave off his hair from his head, his beard, and his eyebrows. He shall shave off all his hair, and then he shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and he shall be clean." Or we've got Leviticus 13, verse 46, where it says, he shall remain unclean as long as he has the disease. He's unclean. He shall live alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. And that's very familiar to the sort of practice that we're having at the moment with, if you test positive, you get an isolation period. The period that we have in Leviticus here is that it's a week that you will isolate and that you're not going to be there. But when you come back, you can't have the disease anymore. So if you're still showing symptoms, you're not allowed to come back. And it's very similar to the sort of practice that we're following today. Notice how they have to wash themselves and shave everything. This is a good way to remove bacteria. It makes it easier to stay clean. There's been studies that show that just by running your hands under running water rather than stagnant water, it can remove 80% of bacteria and other problems with your hands. So obviously, as soon as you're adding soap, it's more beneficial again. So as long as they have the disease, they have to remain outside the camp, and that stops the spread of disease. We also have preventative advice in the Bible and in the laws. We've got the idea about not committing adultery. And if you do commit adultery, then you're going to be stoned. In today's society, that the average number of sexual partners per person is rising. And this is causing a large number of problems because there was a huge spike in things like STIs, or sexually transmitted infections. And they are very difficult to treat if possible. And often they're reported late. So this advice in the Bible prevents that. So if you were to commit adultery, you would be put to death. Now, in today's society, that might come across as a little extreme, but if the person was stoned, then if any disease was caught, it wouldn't be passed on. This and the threat of being stoned is seen as sinful is also a good preventative to spreading STIs. It's also well known, the Bible talks about fornication and sexual relations outside of marriage as sinful. This too would prevent that spread of STIs, as well as provide a healthier view on sex and reducing the mental downsides to premarital and extramarital relations. This second one is a little bit different, the one in Leviticus 20 and verse 17. It says, if a man takes his sister, a daughter of his father or a daughter of his mother, and sees her nakedness, and she sees his nakedness, it's disgrace, and they shall be cut off in the sight of the children of the people. He has uncovered his sister's nakedness, and he shall bear his iniquity. This one wouldn't affect the person's health directly. It could, however, affect the health of the offspring. The chances of genetic problems increase when a child is a product of incest. And we know that today because we've done genetic mapping. We look at genomes and we know that if there's any recessive traits in families, if you are committing incest and there is a child, that child is more likely to have that recessive attribute present itself because there's an increased chance. But looking back at history, if we look at places like Egypt with the pharaohs, or even in the New Testament with the Herods, it wasn't as clear cut back then for people to marry their sisters. It wasn't seen as clear other than for people like the Jews who have it set out as a law to prevent these problems. Just talk about food and diet quickly. So there's a number of dietary advices found in the Bible. This one first, not to eat the fat, would result in a lower cholesterol intake. It would also result in the meat not being eaten in a large percentage of their diet. We're looking at changing diets now, aren't we? And how that sort of Mediterranean diet would have been the better sort of one. And this is a very similar diet, again, for those people in Israel. Red meat's often linked to cancer, and pork especially. Being in Israel, they would have used the olive oil, which is low in saturates, and the butter and the cheese would provide those necessary dietary fats and minerals. So that there's the potential for this diet to be more, healthier than the diets that would have been consumed roundabout in different areas. The second thing that's forbidden under the law is for people to eat the blood of animals. A lot of diseases can be transferred by blood, and in pagan rituals, it wasn't uncommon to drink animal blood. We know now that you can get like prion diseases through blood and through in things like brains, which are a lot harder to treat. And again, this would separate them from the surrounding people, draining the blood and therefore lowering that chance of disease. The Bible also states that life is in the blood, and this is the reason given for not ingesting blood. This might seem trivial to us, that you stay alive through your blood, but circulation and blood supplying nutrients wasn't discovered until 1628, and that's 17 years after the King James Version was first published. So if they followed that advice in the Bible, that they might have discovered problems like that earlier. We've got a passage in Leviticus 11 of a list of food that is clean and unclean. You can have a look at it if you like. And the animal that doesn't part the hoof are unclean, and those that don't chew the cud. This is alongside pigs. Now, pigs are interesting because they have a very similar composition to ourselves, so diseases can be transferred between them and us easily. think about that swine flu epidemic that we had the other year. It's a very similar genetic makeup that we have to pigs. So diseases, like I said, can be spread between us and them very easily. They can carry diseases and we would catch them easier. The other thing that's forbidden in Leviticus 11 is types of seafood besides fish. They are unclean. And if you consider now the amount of people that get food poisoning and illnesses from seafood, it's not hard to see that they're less likely to get ill if they don't eat it. Now, we might blow off illnesses like this that could have been, well, they would have been fatal back in biblical times. But that's because we're in a first world country. Even today, diarrhea is still a leading killer of children, accounting for approximately 8% of all deaths among children under 5 worldwide in 2016. So this translates to about 1,300 young children dying each day, or about 480,000 children a year. And that's despite the availability of a simple and effective treatment, so that we know how to treat things like diarrhea. So in this country, we take health advances for granted, but we can see that following the law here would have been life-saving for the people, but in more than one way. Now, food hygiene, again, is straightforward to us, but back then it would have been, it would have made a lot of difference. We've got anything that has any problems touching it has to be washed, or if it can't be washed, it has to be broken so that you can't get the diseases from what you're eating off. And then that second passage in Leviticus 19, verses 5 to 7, talks about sacrifices, but sacrifices that could be eaten. It could be eaten the same day, you offer it, or the day after. But if anything's left until the third day, it shall be burnt up with fire. If it's eaten at all on the third day, it is tainted, it will not be accepted. So similar to our sell-by dates on food, they had a limited time where they could eat the food. We know now that after a while, it develops bacteria, and especially without refrigeration, it would do this. So this law prevents that, and it's practices that we still use today. Alcohol consumption is interesting, with wine providing antioxidants, but to be in moderation. Another verse says, a little wine for the stomach's sake, and studies show that a person that drinks wine or drinks a little wine generally lives longer than those that don't drink at all. And that's a difference between biblical teachings and Quran. Now, mental illness is a very sensitive topic, but for health, and that health definition that we started with, it includes mental health. It's not covered as such in the Bible, as it wasn't understood like it is today, with people with obvious mental illnesses being thought to have demons. But we'll still try to see what the Bible says about mental health and what we should try to do. So this first example I've got on the screen now, the Sabbath rest. By having a Sabbath rest, so they worked 6 days, and on the 7th day they rested, because that was the pattern that God gave to them. By having the Sabbath rest, it gives the people a chance for rest and recuperation, and giving a rest, even on the busiest times of year, with the other holy days and the festivals, it gives them a break if they trusted in God. We know today that people burn out if they work non-stop, and again, comparing it to the people surrounding the Israelites, they worked every day. It didn't matter whether it was a weekend or not, that they didn't have weekends like we did. You worked or you didn't eat. So for the Israelites to be commanded to have this Sabbath rest, it sets them apart, and it's different to the surrounding nations. Anxieties and depression are very difficult to tackle, as they aren't just feeling afraid or down like people think. They're illnesses like all the other ones that we've spoken about, with impacts on the person that they can't just up and change. The statistics for both of these are higher than ever before and still rising. Now, many types of stress are said to cause depression, but studies have shown that levels of stress are reduced in religious bodies. So just by having a religion, it can reduce your chance. And I'm saying chance, it's not saying that you're not going to get depression at all, but it reduces your chance because you have that trust in a higher being. So yes, you might suffer from depression if you are religious, but you are less susceptible, and again, less susceptible for the greater impacts of depression and through stress-related problems. But I'm not saying that if anyone does suffer from depression, that they don't have enough trust. It doesn't work like that. There is a mental change. But just as one trigger of depression, you're less susceptible if you have a religion. Saying this, of course, we read in the Bible about a number of faithful people who may have suffered from depression or depressive episodes. Job, of course, is one that comes to mind, and Jeremiah wasn't particularly happy either. David could have suffered, with Psalm 13 talking about how his sorrows and his thoughts of death were removed by his trust in God. Even one of the wisest people, Solomon, suffered. In Ecclesiastes 2, verse 17, we read about Solomon hating life because of what is happening on earth. So at this moment of time with the world and its depression will presumably continue to rise, but with trust in God and support from one another, we can hope for that return of Jesus when the world will be changed and pain will be taken away. So we've got some verses on the screen that are hopefully encouraging, but again, it's something to work towards. And again, thinking about that World Health Organization definition at the start of the talk, it includes social well-being, which is partly why I went with that one. We've got these verses in the Bible. Then the Lord said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make a helper fit for him." It's clearly seen that when people are alone or don't socialize, it has negative health impacts on them. A number of studies have shown that when people have a good social life and can talk with people, they cope better with situations. And what a chance there is for us to be part of such a large communal family through Christ Jesus, with all the support that we need. The Bible, like I said, has a number of verses for our learning on the topic. The Genesis one, right back at the start, shows that people need people. We'll talk about the church body later on. The Proverbs one tells us how we should decide who to spend our time with. Like minds move better together, and there's that less friction. So both the Proverbs verses show that thought. For good health, it's a constant thing, a balance of what enters and what is done by the body. Therefore, it's important to, like the children of Israel in the wilderness, get our daily sustenance to try and do what we've been commanded in the Bible. We need this for our spiritual health. We've seen earlier that the Bible and its teachings are clearly beneficial to our physical health, so we can also assume that there are benefits to following the other instructions too. We have this verse from Philippians here that whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. And that's got to be beneficial for our spiritual health. And then I'd like to just consider the ecclesial body. I know we touched on this very, very briefly this morning with our exhort. I just read Corinthians 12, verse 12, it just says, "For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ." We talked about how to keep our physical body healthy. And we have to realize that we can be part or are part of a larger body through Jesus with baptism. So just like with our bodies, we have to try and keep that larger communal body healthy too, both by trying to be spiritually healthy part ourselves, but also supporting and trying to work together to maintain other people's spiritual well-being. Because if one fails, the whole body can be unhealthy. It goes back to that definition of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. You need to be complete. And then we've got that passage in the Bible that says, if one fails, they all fail. If one is failing, we need to be there to strengthen them in order to try and maintain that healthy spiritual body, the ecclesial body that we have as a family in Christ. We're also told that a wise man listens to advice. So as a family, we need to listen to one another and learn from it to stay healthy. Finally, I'd like to draw our thoughts towards a more positive time. We have this passage in Isaiah that says, "Say to those who have an anxious heart, be strong, fear not. Behold, your God will come with vengeance, with the recompense of God. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame man shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute sing for joy. For waters will break forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert." We have a picture of the future, if we trust in God, of things being made complete, of both the land being healed and coming from deserts into lush green land, from social problems with us all coming together to be one community, from mental problems. It says, "Say to those who have an anxious heart, be strong, fear not." So mental well-being will be strengthened, and that physical changes that can come to place if we believe and are baptized and want to be part of that kingdom. We have the chance for change. We have a passage in 1 Corinthians 15 that talks about the change that we will have. It says, "We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed. For this perishable body must put on the imperishable, and this mortal body put on immortality. When the perishable puts on the imperishable, and the mortal puts on immortality, then it shall come to pass, the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law." If we have that trust in God and are baptized and become part of this family, we have a hope that all the problems and all of the health problems that we have now won't be anymore. And I'm sure if you continue to listen, that there'll be other talks that talk about how we are to change. But I hope it's been helpful this evening to show that the Bible knows what it's talking about, and that there are evidences there if we look for them, both to our spiritual and our physical health, if we follow its teachings. Thank you for listening.